topic of the day is deloads. Should we do them? Beast mode forever? Fuck it. Train in the grave? Die forever? None of that shit. We're gonna go through stuff today. So, some of your questions may be answered soon. The primary goal of a deload is this. So, catch you later, fatigue. The primary goal of a deload is to dissipate fatigue. So, any tactic you do in that deload has got to always come down to that first thing. It's the top area in your hierarchy of importance. It's going to be the contextual factor. Like, oh, I'm thinking of doing this deload, thinking of doing my deload. Does it dissipate fatigue? etc, etc. You come back to that. So, you've probably heard of a few ways to deload. Some people manipulate volume, some people manipulate intensity, some people don't train at all, some people do new exercises, stick to machines. There's different pros, cons with all this stuff, which we might get to in a second. So the first thing to understand with fatigue is how much is there in the first place. Sounds simple, but the amount of fatigue you generate through an accumulation cycle before that will dictate how long or what sort of methods you'll use to get rid of fatigue in the first place. So, for example, it's quite common among powerlifters to progress, and same for bodybuilders really, you progress in the variables that make stuff harder. Progression. But here's the thing to understand. Each part of overload, which is king, is going to help you get like this. But something comes along with it. Yes, fatigue comes along with it. So you might actually be that much better at the end of the program versus the start. But you won't actually see a difference, because this is a difference with how good your performance is. Make sense? That's okay. I lift 100 kilos, I lift 100 kilos. But that number is really just 120 up there. But it's 100 down there. So you probably think, fuck, I feel just as weak. That's because you're carrying 20 kilos of residual fatigue there. The idea is, get rid of fatigue, the adaptation still stays up there, now there's that massive gap. I've gained 20 kilos in my squat, etc. Okay, so I want to go into this first. So we haven't talked about nutrition thus far, but there's an important part. It's just the time to lower calories because you're probably doing less volume, less intensity, you're not training as hard. Ooh, I need to do the post-workout because it's not that hard, etc. Primary goal, again, get rid of fatigue. So, at worst case scenario, you're at maintenance calories. Best case scenario, which you probably see a bit better reduction of fatigue, is you're in a surplus. A deficit is only going to add fatigue. Deficits in general add more fatigue. There's more stress hormones that go on. Cortisol, lower testosterone, all these things that aren't advantageous for recovery are higher when you're in a deficit. So, if we're sort of covering off that nutrition, okay, we're good, we're put on maintenance. We're going to keep coming back to that idea of dissipate fatigue. Sometimes you might see, for example, like Nick may have done this before, for example, you're doing 4x5 on your squats, right? And maybe let's say he's a strong cat, let's say it's 140 week 1, 150, 160. And then the idea here, that 4x5 for the deload is to do 2 sets of 5. Doing less volume, which that is, will decrease fatigue. The question is it okay to keep the intensity higher? Yes and no. Volume is more fatiguing than intensity. So okay, at least if you're ticking off that bucket, it's a good idea. But again, with fatigue, you're going to notice strength decrease. So the idea, okay, should you really be doing your heaviest weight right there without the deload? Well, the one thing you've got to consider is, okay, yes, we're progressing in weight, but we're carrying that fatigue with us. Is that the best time to see your peak, where your peak's at? I wouldn't say so. I'd say it's probably your highest chance of injury, the state where you've got the highest amount of fatigue. So the ideal part is really just keep everything low. Look, I understand the idea of I want to push hard. I enjoy training hard myself from time to time. I like, I want pushing myself volume pump. If I can't do that, at least I'm pushing heavy weights. It makes us feel good. It's probably why we come to the gym. But I think there's a lot of benefits in, okay, put things in the back burner, really make sure you milk out all of the fatigue generated, and then from there, what you're essentially doing is collecting that paycheck. We've been working hard. With that fatigue there, that's the guy at the bank saying, you ain't depositing today. We get rid of the fatigue. We can collect on the gains we've made. That's the primary goal of the deload, collecting the gains you made before. Another part I want to talk about with deloads, why they can be beneficial doing them with low everything, is the idea of psychology. Look, psychology is like, oh, I don't want to be limited to psychology, but there probably is a lot of value to, okay, I feel like I'm sitting on my ass, I feel like I'm doing nothing. Going from that week 4, wherever your peak accumulation week is, of, I can't be fucking going to the gym. I need more coffee, etc. To get into that state again where you're just excited to train, like, fuck, I can't wait to get that pump. I can't wait to start progressing things along. There's probably a lot of value there. And that momentum is probably going to get you through a whole another mesocycle, rather than start through like, okay, I'm at the gym, another 4 weeks of progressing. I'm already a bit tired, but I'll get through, I'm a warrior. What sort of accumulation after that, so second sort of thing we're talking about now, do you think is having a better effect? The one that's sort of ravishing, it's got the rabies in the mouth, it's one of those tied back dogs. Or the person's like, still carrying a bit of fatigue, let's progress. At least I trained hard last week, that's going to carry me far. Probably want to be the excited person to get you through. The example we've used so far is a 1 week deload model after accumulation, but realise there's probably even some benefits to having maybe a maintenance phase, so something of very low volume, just enough intensity to get you by throughout the year. So that can again progress you in a psychological standpoint, get rid of any niggles, any fatigue related niggles at all. Some of the ones that can't be like solved in 1 week, maybe things like some of your more passive structures that don't recover as quick. That can be sorted out in a longer deload cycle. So occasionally there is more benefit to having a longer deload, maybe once, twice throughout the year. That could be 2 weeks, could be 3 weeks. Another thing you can consider is, especially for you guys out there training Gen Pop do their own deloads nearly all the time. There'll be a time where it's like, okay, we're training, progressing, well, I might do a deload soon, and they drop a text on you, hey, I'm going on a holiday in a week, and I'll be gone for 2 weeks. I don't plan on training there. Deload sorted, sort of thing. So look, have in the back of your mind, there are some structures why you should definitely do it and you shouldn't completely auto-regulate. But note that, okay, work your lifestyle around it. So sometimes these deloads will figure themselves out for yourself. As to know when you should take one, if you're feeling like you're carrying a lot of fatigue and you can't progress in your lifts, it's time to step back. It's time, if you can't progress in any other factors, you should progress in your lifts.
Yeah. All right. So, well, thank you. Oh, that hurt, John. Yeah. So my main question for you is, how would you structure a deload week? So,
Okay.
is it the same as what you've done throughout the mesocycle, or is it simply I'm just going to throw in new exercises, maybe some prehab type exercises, or something completely altogether? How would you structure it?
Okay, that's a good question. So, again, come back to the key principle. Your method has to dissipate fatigue. That's non-negotiable as far as I'm concerned. Other than that, there's a way of things you could do. So, the idea, one thing you mentioned was chuck in new exercises. That can work okay if you're trying to do an intro week. So the idea of an intro week is usually like, the idea is you progress in volume and then you take the deload. Sometimes you can have that at the start, the really low volume block, and get rid of the last area's fatigue and start there. So you're used to lifts by the time you're doing your accumulation and then work up from there. I prefer not to do that too often, maybe occasionally, just because with new exercises, it's meant new learning effect and probably had more fatigue anyway, but it can give you momentum for the rest of your mesocycle. So again, it's just how you're gonna skin a cat. So if you're ticking that fatigue like sort of button, if you're crossing that off your list, you're already 85% of the way there. From there, you're just trying to tick small boxes. How I do it sometimes, out of the variables I always bring down, no matter what, I'm always gonna bring down volume. Whether you are going for strength, whether you're gonna go for size, doesn't matter. Volume's coming down for me. Volume's got the most fatiguing effect out of everything. I generally like to bring the reps in reserve. There we are. I like to make that higher. For example, the end of this cycle could do maybe 1 more. You want to make sure you can do, 3, 4 more. Again, that's sort of fatiguing reps where you're close to failure. More high threshold motor units are recruited, more fibers, more systemic fatigue, more things to the brain and nervous system. Probably not the best idea. So make sure your sets are easy. Although you can sort of dissipate that, the volume's low enough. For example, one really hard set will be less fatiguing than 6 sets of something nearly to failure, like 2 reps in reserve. So it can work. Any other parts you had towards that? So I think you mentioned, how do I do it? I'll probably make sure. So volume goes low, reps in reserve, that style of intensity goes low. Intensity usually goes lower as well. Now, for someone like myself, here's an interesting factor. Let's say you're training 4 to 5 days a week in that accumulation. A very easy way for someone that likes to feel like they've worked in the gym, which is all of us sometimes, versus some people that need to I just want to go in and have a feel for things. If someone wants to keep training 4 to 5 days a week, you just make sure their sets are really low, probably the same exercises.
So you can keep frequency still quite up there as long as the volume and intensity, come down. Okay.
Absolutely, you can. But on the other side of the spectrum, that's more of a psychology thing. The other side of the spectrum, if you I like to feel tad worked during those weeks, again, not ideal. You're probably going to just decrease volume the most and intensity and all those things via frequency coming down. So people like myself that sometimes like to feel work unless I'm doing something. It's just this terrible paradigm. It's wrong. We're getting rid of fatigue so we can collect our paycheck, as I mentioned.
Is it a good time for some people, to implement, some cardiovascular training during a deload? Or is that really, only not a big deal at all?
Yeah, so lower frequency is the other one, by the way. But with the cardiovascular training, boring, but mention again, if it brings fatigue, not a good idea. HIIT, I wouldn't recommend. Low intensity, steady state, it's not that hard unless it's systemically fatiguing. It's very parasympathetic in nature, so you've got your sympathetic nervous system, which is, you're hyped up, ready to go, versus your parasympathetic, more chill, the stuff that recovers you. But stimulates that stuff that recovers you, the low intensity, ETC, probably a good idea. Look, you're not going to get amazing heart benefits or all that stuff in a week, just with anything.
How could you track whether your deload is actually effective?
So there's a few different ways. Some people like to do biomarkers. Some people like to use more anecdotal observational methods. My number one thing is, by the time you are doing your next mesocycle, you are fresh and ready to go. So I'm like, it's a simple how you're feeling. It matters. It sounds cliche and you can't add hardcore that, but it matters. It's always number one. You're feeling fresh, you're feeling ready to go, and you're excited. You can do, some people do heart rate, HRV. Nothing against that. It's just, is it always necessary? Maybe. But for this, I think if you're really ticking off that first thing, you probably notice that's in a better spot anyway. Maybe not always, but worth mentioning. So how do you know when you're ready to go? And then the ideal way you know is next mesocycle, your performance is up. And if it isn't, you probably need to look at, okay, did I deload long enough? Or was my last accumulation block a failure in reality? So if you're not getting better the next mesocycle in whatever facet you're trying to go to, it's either you haven't got rid of fatigue, so you're still sort of carrying that sort of person dragging you down, or you didn't actually get that much better in the first place.
When would you say is the worst time to put a deload in, especially for someone in competitive sports?
Interesting. If they're in a circumstance where they could be getting better, it sounds cliche.
Yeah.
But
let's just say they're close to their competitions and stuff like that. Is it ideal to have a deload?
Yeah.
Bodybuilding sake, powerlifting sake, crossfitting, anything like that.
Let's take that more individually. So powerlifting, yeah. We had bodybuilding, and we had CrossFit. I'd just about argue in all three of those facets, they're extremely important, probably more than the regular person. Reason being, you're stronger, you're probably competing, you're probably better for initial things, there's been more fatigue, more important for you to perform. Secondarily, if you look at the things people do for their powerlifting, bodybuilding, more so powerlifting CrossFit meets for our first one, because it's had more performance based. Again, you want to be carrying fatigue in there, you want to be able to perform well. Get rid of fatigue, cash in your paycheck, and you can actually perform for starters. Secondarily, some people do weight cuts around then. So obviously the weight cuts and the nutrition stuff we mentioned, doing low calories, that's going to add fatigue in the first place. So if you're already chucking more fatigue in there, oh my god, you've really got to pull back the brakes in training. And then the day, with your sort of amount of cortisol and all these things that are important with stress and how much just life stress in general you can handle, training is an accessory. It's a luxury. If all the stresses and any other variable you can think of in life are high, then there's not going to be much room for training. So if you're already adding stress via, weight cut, I'm nervous for the competition, some people get really nervous. They're sort of shaking as they go, like me in a video. they will notice that. As a bodybuilding, it's especially important as well because this is the time you start to see peak weeks and stuff like that. The number one enemy of peak weeks in general is high cortisol because it makes transportation of glucose to the muscle, makes you sort of liberate other water, so a bit watery. That becomes an issue, so your loading is going to be fucked if you're actually carrying fatigue, because fatigue and cortisol are pretty good friends, by the way. Yeah, I definitely argue it's important. And again, you don't want to be performing shit in the day. So if there's ever time, okay, you're trying to milk, okay, get better and better as much as you can. You don't want to be deloading 6 weeks before. Yeah, 6 weeks before, you definitely feel fresh in the day, I guess. That's one good part. But you've probably missed some adaptation you could have gotten. So it's that balance. You sort of reverse engineer. Here's a competition. Here's how much I'll deload based on what I'm doing before. And you sort of plug in from there. So it's just reverse engineering. And then the mesocycle from there. So, like, the least amount of time, but I'll definitely be able to recover, is your ideal time for deload.
Cool.
That's the structure, so.
Awesome. My last question is, let's get rid of the performance athletes and let's dig into Gen Pop. So we're talking more about, those people that have a lot of work, family, everything, think of all the stress that fills up your bucket, right?
Yeah.
Would they be people, that should take more deloads because of those certain stresses, or is it because they're not on that competitive level, they can train forever?
Yes and no. Yes, in a few senses, no in a few others. It might even out at the end. Maybe slightly lead towards slightly more for Gen Pop because they're usually more stressed. On the whole though, because I think we mentioned at the start, how much you deload is relative to how much you accumulate. Athletes are able to train more, so they're able to bring in more accumulation, at the same time more fatigue by training itself. Whereas your Gen Pop is probably creeping up at a slow rate because they've got other things they need to do. They need to pay the bills, they probably can't handle a bunch of volume in the first place, so they don't be progressing as much, but at least they won't be carrying as much fatigue directly from training. But the other aspects of their life are almost what piggybacks them up to there. So you get them similar to athlete, and you both need to bring it back down. That sort of makes sense. So, whereas, okay, both of them are sort of filling their stress buckets. It's just the athletes are sort of having that much versus Gen Pop having that much. But the other stuff's fatiguing anyway. Again, it usually starts like, okay, I've got a holiday coming up. Happens a lot, they're sick. You're a PT, Nick. How often do people come calling sick or I'm busy or etc?
All the time.
And on the whole, how Gen Pop, yeah, they can train more. How often would you say they train a week?
Between 1 and 3.
1 and 3? And what do you say the performance athlete try and get better is?
5+.
Yeah, so that's the first thing. Like they're probably
off season for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might change as well.
Might
so
change,
yeah. So yeah, key point being, look, they're gonna do less, probably accumulating less direct fatigue from training, but they've already got other lifestyle factors that are very stressful. Some of the performance athlete, one that after the training session, has a perfect post-workout nutrition, has a nap, just sits in the beach, gets some vitamin D.
Exactly.
This isn't the luxury, the stress about paying the bills sometimes. Psychological body stress is very common, something you see in this industry. You name it really, everyone's got their own stresses. Psychological, deep down stress is always going to fill your bucket first. Yeah, so it probably evens out.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why individual programming, is so important. Like you can look at all the celebrity workouts, you can look at all what the top athletes are doing in the world, but there's a reason why they're able to do that, because they're at that level. They have that probably a bit less stress than what the Gen Pop has, but there's certain things that you guys gotta look at, and I guess it comes down to the final thing. When talking about fatigue, is whether you're Gen Pop, whether you're an athlete. Excuse me, Conor.
What do you go this way, sir?
Got this from a person I don't necessarily know, but would like to. Chase, performance, and Conor, I'll let you finish this one off.
This is very cute, guys. Not anal. Fatigue.
Can you spell it right, guys?
Can't draw it right, but I can spell it right.
Chase performance, not fatigue.
When you see that performance starts to differ, it's time to deal with it.